Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I feel greatly honored to have been invited to speak in front of you, and having been invited to do such a long trip from Germany to this beautiful town of Chicago, which I've never been before. And I must admit, when I walked around this wonderful weather in the afternoon, I almost forgot that I had to give a lecture later on tonight. So unfortunately, I had to cut short my visit to, as I said, to the beautiful town to speak here in front of you. But now I'm very glad that I'm here. Thank you for coming. Now, my problem was that I was said I should talk to a general audience, but I know some of you know much more about certain things that I'm talking about, be this economics or be this Near Eastern history or Roman history. I'm really a specialist in Ptolemaic or classical Greek history. So please, everybody who is a specialist in one of the things that I'm touching upon, forgive me if I'm doing this rather superficially. I also have to apologize, as usual, about my not only German accent, but also occasional grammatical errors. I don't send my manuscripts any longer to native speakers to get them corrected, so this is all mine, and there are certain probably mistakes in it, but I hope you will understand me. Okay, monetary networks in the Greco-Roman world. We all think we cannot live without money. We also think that primitive people could live without money. Just have to get this right. Money is an icon of civilization and progress. As one authority suggests, the invention of money was one of the most important steps in the evolution of human civilization, comparable with the domestication of animals, the cultivation of the land, and the harnessing of power. Another common belief is that before money there was only barter, the archetypal economic transaction which requires a double coincidence of wants of exchange. That's my favorite picture. But money was not a step on the ladder of human evolution. Money is deeply rooted in forms of society and forms of social organization. Most, if not all, low technology societies have money that is a medium with which they settle transaction either interpersonally, with the chief, with the gods, or with other tribes and people. They use money for ritual payments, for paying penalties, for interpersonal compensation of injury, theft or murder, for dowries, war indemnities, and many other purposes. A large variety of money stuffs are attested historically to have served monetary purposes, such as pearls, spearheads, precious metal containers, and salt, cowrie shells, or glass beads. Often these media are called pre-monetary because they do not fulfill all purposes that our money does. According to common economic theory, money proper is defined by four functions. It is a medium of exchange, a medium of payment, a store of value, and a unit of account. That is, you can exchange money for things and services, you can pay your taxes, so exchange and payment is something different. You can store your money in a bank account without it hopefully losing value, and you can evaluate your home in monetary terms and then compare it to the value of other assets. The definition of money by its various functions is very helpful, but the term all-purpose money, which is often given to it, is misleading. Money has more functions than this definition suggests. We can buy future assets with it and can direct people's behavior and well-being with money. One can manipulate wealth and the value of objects and services. At the same time, money does not buy everything. For example, it does not buy feelings, emotions, or babies, though it does buy human effort in form of human labor. It can hardly buy services like divine grace, although at some time in history it did, and it cannot privatize air or water. It also has no stable value, and there are problems, as we all know, with using it as a store without regularly looking after it. Money can serve more purposes the more people accept it. Barter occurs, in contrast to popular belief, only when people have no social or political connections whatsoever with each other. That is, when they have no common unit on the basis of which they can evaluate and compare the goods they exchange. People who barter have no common weights and measures, nor even a standard other than their taste, by which the value of objects can, and thus exchange rates, can be established. Because of the potential hostility between bartering people, barter has historically taken place in protected spaces, in harbors and border markets, which were established by special agreement and authority that had an interest in contact and exchange. And therefore this picture is very good. There's at least a certain gap between the exchanging groups, so they are a bit protected from each other. If money use expanded, this was always man-made. Money does not, and this is my first point about monetary networks, expand because of its intrinsic qualities and advantages. If some money stuff like precious metal coinage is deployed by individuals for convenience in cross-border exchange, it is used as commodity and not as money. This was well recognized by the Roman jurist Paulus, who defined coined money as requiring a forma publica, a publicly recognized form, and an estimatio, an agreed value. Failing this, pecunia, money, was traded only as marks, a commodity. In this paper, I wish to pursue the question of how money and its complexity as a tool of exchange and payment expanded in the ancient world. This is an important question, as monetary networks are regarded as cost-saving. They make laborious exchange rates, money testing, and scales redundant. The development of monetary networks, however, cannot be analyzed simply by studying coins traveling across borders. Classical Athenian coins, for example, can be found as far as India, Arabia, and Ethiopia to the south of Egypt. But such coins were mostly used as bullion pieces of precious metal rather than as money. We have to demonstrate, therefore, that coins and common coinages were used as money within expanding geographical zones where people had confidence that they could use them at their face value and not just as pieces of precious metal. Monetary networks, you can believe, otherwise I would have not called my paper like that, not a development of the 20th century. Quite on the contrary, territorial currencies whose validity extends only to the border of one state were typical of national governments and the growing territoriality of nation-states. It was, as Benjamin Cohen shows in a stimulating book entitled The Future of Money, not easy to contract existing monetary networks when national governments asserted their sovereignty by exclusive currencies. They first had to create a robust national currency by fixing it solely to the medium of coins and to fiduciary banknotes, and secondly, eliminate competing foreign currencies. They achieved the latter mostly by legal tender laws and public receivability provisions, that is, regulations about what currency may be used for remittance of taxes or satisfying other contractual obligations to the state. Not all nation-states were able to successfully insulate their currencies without losing their stakes in an economy. In such circumstances, they had to choose either to surrender monetary sovereignty by monetary or currency unions with other states, or to subordinate their currency to a stronger currency by pegging its value to it. Only after World War II, by an increasing volume of trade, which in combination with technological and institutional innovation in financial practice, greatly facilitated cross-border monetary flows and real currency competition re-emerged. Most histories of money in antiquity were written under the influence of such national currency regimes. Most influentially, the ancient historian Moses Finlay argued that ancient currencies from an economic point of view were a real nuisance. In a seminal work, The Ancient Economy, he stated, "The Greek passion for coins, and for beautiful coins at that, is well known and sometimes misunderstood. For a long time, this passion was not shared by many of their most advanced neighbors, the Phoenicians, Egyptians, Etruscans, or Romans, because it was essentially a political phenomenon, a piece of local vanity, patriotism, or advertisement with no far-reaching importance. Given the political sense of coinage, or the political sense of coinage, it is not surprising that the autonomous Greek states made no substantial effort to abate that nuisance. Agreements between states about exchange ratios, for example, were so rare as to be relatively effectively non-existent. Numerous examples of shared weight standards and monetary unions show that Finlay was simply wrong. Of course, ancient coinages were local to start with, thereby reflecting, as we contended above, forms of social organization. But a closer look at the development of coinage from its beginning in the 6th century BCE to its greatest expansion in the 3rd century CE shows that currency networks expanded alongside political expansion and the economic organization that went with it. Now I do a brief section on the introduction of coinage. We must start at the beginning. The first coins were minted in Greco-Lydian cities on the coast of Asia Minor during the late 7th century BCE. They were struck in a local alloy of gold and silver called electron, which occurs naturally on Mount Tmolos and the river Paktolos in Lydia. The idea to coin precious metal spread into major cities of the Aegean, such as Aegina, Corinth, Athens, and some Ionian and Cycladic communities in the middle of the 6th century, when Asia Minor was under Lydian control and the Greek aristocracies were in close link with them. Greek coins outside Lydia were struck in pure silver, according to local weight systems, and bore local emblems of civic identity. Bronze and gold coins do not appear before the 4th century BCE. The technology of making coins was trivial and had been around for a long time. Its use in the area around Mount Tmolos was probably linked to the need of making large numbers of standardized payments in a metal whose silver-gold ratio was erratic and thus needed some official evaluation. The function of the first coins, both in Lydia and in the Greek cities, is not known. It has long been assumed that coinage was invented to pay mercenaries, since military payment became one of the most important reasons of the Greek and Roman government to mint coins in the following centuries. But there's absolutely no evidence that this was the reason for minting the first coins, and it is nowadays assumed that coins were used primarily for local exchange purposes, such as these penalty payments and injuries, dowries, and so on. How they spread to the Aegean from Lydia, again, cannot be said for certain, but it is likely that the intense contacts between Lydian, Ionian, and Greek elites in the mainland played a vital role. The history of money, that is not coinage, the history of money that lies behind the invention of coinage is much longer. In the epics of Homer in the late 8th century, oxen value appears as being used as a means of account. Women, for example, and weaponry are worth so many oxen. Gifts and recompense for injury and murder were paid in form of precious metal containers. Grain, wine, and other natural products were used by people to honor their lords. In other words, dependent tenants paid rents and taxes in kind, but this kind also assumed some form of money because it was used regularly for the same transactions. Archaeologically, we have in addition local evidence for iron spits to have filled some payment functions, possibly in a ritual and religious context. We thus have the typical situation of limited purpose money. Oxen, precious metal containers, grain, and iron spits each served some pre-monetary function without any single one filling all of them at the same time. This seems to have changed around the 7th century, when the Aegean world became linked more closely to the trading and exchange networks in which precious metals circulated. In contrast to the kingdoms of Babylonia and Mesopotamia, which had large resources of silver of their own, and which had used silver bullion for millennia in all monetary functions, the fragmented world of the Greek cities was more dependent on the circulation of precious metal. By the end of the 7th century, there's no evidence that either oxen value or spits still served any monetary functions. Instead, Silver containers and certified pieces of silver were used for dedication, for assessing value, penalties, and taxes, as well as for actual payments that were made towards these transactions. The earliest extant written laws preserved on stone assess punishment for breaking public and sacred laws in terms of certain numbers of lebetai, cauldrons, or simply cremata, which are precious objects. In southern Italy and Sicily, we have archaeological evidence for plugs and ingots which were certified by weight. A number of these ingots and pieces bear inscriptions showing that they were dedicated. 5 are known from Poseidonia in Paestum. Another one was found at Francavilla Marittima, about 9 miles northwest of Sybaris, and another had been dedicated to the sanctuary of Zeus in Sicily. The largest of the Poseidonia ingots is 9.3 centimeters in diameter, 1 centimeter thick, and weighing 571 grams. That's this big picture. When it was dedicated to the temple, it was inscribed Heras hieron phron phi tox hamin, sacred to Hera, strengthen our bow. It was a kind of magic item that uttered a prayer. Several laws attributed to Solon, moreover, fixed monetary penalties and state equivalences of barley and sheep in terms of drams of silver. But already at this early date of bullion money, Solon is said to have reformed also the system of metal weights from 70 to 100 drams to the mina. Although the division of the mina into 100 drams was at the same time rather unique, the use of drums and obols was not. It was borrowed from a weight system current in the Peloponnese and was also adopted by Aegina and Corinth. For the first coins were struck in Greece. Thus, some Greek cities had attempted to make their monetary units related to the weight of silver and made it compatible. We can assume that certified silver ingots and the earliest coins circulated together. In the famous first Ephesus hoard from the early 6th century, they were clearly deposited together. As Greek cities mended coinage, they did do so on the basis of their local weight system. Miletus used a drachma of 3.5 gram, Phocaea one of 4.025 grams, Aegina of 6.2, Athens and Euboea of 4.3, Corinth of 4.4, and in southern Italy they minted their coins on a drum of 3.75 grams. What is more, some towns made a 4-drum piece their main coin, the so-called stater, such as Miletus, Phocaea, Chalkis, Eretia, and later Athens, and some a 2-drum piece, a D-drum, like Aegina and early Athens and Corinth. The earliest archaic coins show a very local exchange pattern. Thus, local weight standards were not a nuisance, but simply a reflection of their mostly local use. No city attempted actively to prevent other coins to mix with their own in their markets. As Herodotus in the 5th century and Xenophon in the 4th century respectively give us examples of conversion rates that were used between coins of different weight standards. So 1 Lydian siglos was equivalent to 7.5 Attic obols, according to Xenophon. The accounts of the temple building project at Epidaurus, again 4th century, show that Athenian and Aeginetan workers were paid in their home coinage, while the accounts which the temple published list all payments in Aeginetan coin units. So the Athenian ones had to be converted into Aeginetan units. So once cities did look more outward, there were ways of dealing with money flows between cities. The advantage of using local coinage in a local market was that the weight and purity of coins were certified and tested by home authorities, while foreign coins needed to be trusted untested. It was therefore that traders assembled cachets of different currencies, each to be used where they were most trusted and accepted. I'm now turning to monetary networks. Already archaic coinages reflect currency competition and hierarchies. We know of 6 major weight standards, but more than 115 mints were in operation by the end of the 6th century. Most towns adopted the weight standard of a coinage of a city with which they shared transactions and with which they wished to demonstrate connections on a political level. Some cities, like the cities of Crete, adopted a foreign coinage altogether. The Aeginetan weight standard dominated the Aegean by the beginning of the 5th century and gives Aegina a pioneering role in the growth of monetary networks. Late archaic and classical coin hoards show that the Aeginetan coins traveled earlier and further beyond the Aegean than other Greek coins. The predominance of the Aeginetan weight standard is usually attributed to Aegina's dominant role in trade at the time. Yet currency competition is the result of a much more complex interplay of economic, political, and ideological factors. In the 5th century, ethnic and political communality, the emphasis on common roots, languages, and relationships, played a vital role in the formation of foreign relationships and identity. Monetary alliances and the iconography of coins even formed part of the articulation and confirmation of such alliances. So I wouldn't say, like Finlay, it was all political, but politics and economics played both their parts. The dominance of the Aeginetan weight standard was outgrown by a much more powerful monetary network following the Delian League founded by the Athenians after the Persian War. The degree of monetary consolidation that came along with the military alliance of the Athenians is reflected in the composition of hoards from the 1st of the 5th century onwards and is confirmed by the Athenian tribute quota lists that survived for several years from 454 BCE until 430 BCE. The lists recorded the 60th part of each contributor's payment that was reserved for Athena and Athens, and from 413 onwards of the income from the 5% harbor tax that was raised by the Athenians in the allied cities. The tribute was levied at first in the form of ships or money, but in different currencies. By the time of the first tribute quota list, however, the League treasury had been transferred from Delos to Athens, and all payments were noted down, and with a few exceptions, probably also made in Athenian coinage. Some figures can illustrate the speed and extent of monetary consolidation in the course of the Delian League. Over 280 cities belonged to the Delian League at one time or another. Between 140 and 180 allies contributed in any given year. According to a recent assessment, only 69 of the contributors minted their own coinage either continuously or intermittently during the time of the League. Some towns used Athenian coins and minted small fractions only, just for their daily transactions. A measurable increase in Athenian coin production during the early years of the League was most likely related to the increase both in Athenian minting and in monetary transactions consolidating the monetary network of the empire. The transformation of the League treasury into a fund of Athenian coinage by 454 increased still further the production of Athenian coinage. By a rather conservative calculation, somewhere between 1 and 9 million tetradrachms were annually produced in the Athenian mint from around 450 BCE onwards. Although the absolute volume of coin production cannot be ascertained, the figure renders it almost certain that from the mid-5th century, Athens produced the largest portion of the total coins in circulation. The consequences of this scale of coin production for the coin supply in the Aegean was absolutely massive. Half of the members of the Athenian League ceased minting between the foundation of the League and 445 BC. By then, the number of minting states among the allies had dropped from about 35 to 20% of all allies, among those which maintained their own mints were only the autonomous members of the Athenian League, Chios and Samos, as well as the minters of electron coinage, which still took place in the northern Aegean and the Hellespont. Monetary consolidation becomes even more apparent if the time until the Peloponnesian War is taken into consideration. No Athenian ally who used to coin on the Aeginetan standard produced high-value coins by the time of the Peloponnesian War. Only one city, which had minted on the Attic standard, continued to mint its own coinage. Those allies which did continue to mint their own coinages were part of other weight systems, such as the Phocaean or the Persian, which dominated the northern coast of the eastern Mediterranean. Apparently, states in the pre-League period who had in the pre-League period belonged to smaller regional monetary networks not linked to Greece and the Western Aegean were more likely to maintain their insulated position than those having participated in either of the two great Greek networks, the Aeginetan and the Athenian. In short, most of the highly monetized Aegean cities stopped minting in the earlier years of the League, while cities in Ionia and the Hellespont continued to mint even when they became members of the Athenian League. At the height of the Athenian currency domination, the Athenians seem to have taken the step of mandating the use of Athenian silver coinage by all members of the League. According to the so-called Athenian Standard Decree, all members of the Athenian alliance, apart from the cities minting electrum coins, these Hellespontine cities, were prohibited by law from minting their own silver coinage and use foreign coins in the market. The decree also foresaw that non-Athenian coins had to be brought to Athens if the Athenian council so ordered, and to be reminted for a fee. As we just saw, many independent mints had ceased minting local coinage by the 440s already. So the coinage decree cannot, as it has often been done in the past, be interpreted as a high-handed act of taking away the city's monetary autonomy. The date of the decree also is unknown. If it belonged to the early years of the empire, i.e. the 440s, it might have been the attempt of consolidating Athenian coin circulation even further than it did by its own dynamic. If it belonged to the later period, such as after the Sicilian expedition in 415 BC, it is likely to have been related to the change of tribute payment. From 413 onwards, tribute was no longer paid as a fixed sum by each city, but each city had to forward their harbor taxes to Athens. This would have meant a huge influx of foreign coins into Athens if minting did not take place locally. Remember that all former tribute had previously been payable in Athenian coins, so the standard decree is most likely to have aimed at shifting the costs of reminting to the allies rather than the Athenian mint itself. Numismatically, incidentally, there's no evidence of any effects of the decree, that is, that there's any abrupt change of numismatic practice. The dominance of the Athenian currency in mainland Greece and the Aegean island had also significant effects on coin circulation beyond the members of the Athenian military alliance. Imitations of Athenian tetradrachms were minted from the beginning of the 5th century onwards. There was imitation both at the pictorial level to indicate alliance. That's the Athenian, and that's the one from Turi. As in the coinage of Turi, and at the monetary level, that is, local governors issued coins that looked like Athenian ones. That's in the case of a satrapal coinage, which uses the owl and then has at the bottom actually a coin mark here that shows that it is actually linked to that Athena and not to that one. Particularly noteworthy is also a special issue attributed to a Persian king or satrap of the late 5th or early 4th century BCE. The three letters Athi, coin of the Athenians, of the Athenian tetradrachm, was here replaced by the letters Baz of the king, notably in Greek letters. There you have the Baz. The obverse of the coinage bore a bearded portrait of a Persian noble instead of Athena. Thus, this coin seems to have been intended for Greeks to be used. A similar attempt of local money masquerading as Athenian is a tetradrachm from Arabia that was minted on the Athenian weight standard and with the same reverse as the Athenian owl. I like this one in particular. After the loss of the empire, local coin production and the use of the Aeginetan standard by some mints re-emerged. Yet the Athenian tetradrachm continued to dominate exchange in the Aegean and far beyond. Xenophon stressed the exceptional desirability of Athenian coinage in the mid-4th century. Athenian coins dominate 4th century coin hoards by a notable margin. The Athenian standard was adopted by Philip of Macedon for his imperial coinage. Imitations of Athenian coins peaked in the first half of the 4th century, with more and more remote issuers producing status in Athenian style. We just saw the one from Arabia. In 375 BCE, the Athenians once again legislated about the production of coinage, about Athenian coinage. According to the law of Nicophone, the money testers sitting beside the bankers' tables in the Agora and the Piraeus should test all coins brought forward for exchange or depositing. Genuine Athenian coins should be accepted by the bankers, good imitations should be approved and returned to their owners, while imitations with a base metal core or counterfeit coins should be confiscated and destroyed. Many scholars, influenced by national currency laws, believe that the law was made to control Athenian coin use in the Athenian market, so that only genuine Athenian coins could be used there. In fact, it shows an Athenian concern for controlling and testing a much wider range of coinages, not produced in Athens, but forming a monetary network with the city. Athenian coinage had ceased to be an instrument of a local economy dominated by a local symbol of identity and ownership. It had turned into a widespread economic medium that was controlled by the Athenian government in order to increase its trust and value in an ever-increasing number of markets. Athenian coinage shows that Greek political organization outgrew its local pattern and gradually moved towards larger political units. Alongside the large monetary networks of Athens, there were minor ones. Taras or Tarentum dominated southern Italy, Syracuse dominated Sicilian weight standards in Greek, Phoenician and native towns in Sicily, and in the Black Sea and Hellespontine areas, electrum coinage, which I've now mentioned 3 times, retained a dominant influence. The spread of the weight standard of the wealthy island of Chios in Ionia and the northern Aegean in the first half of the 4th century throws further light on the interplay of political and economic factors in the formation of monetary networks. Oops. I thought I had a map here, but it probably got lost. Sorry. So Chios is in front of the Ionian coast of Asia Minor. Through the experience of the Athenian imperial coinage, the advantage of a united weight system and coinage must have become generally recognized. Chios had been a rich island from the Archaic period onwards, drawing its wealth from the substantial wine production which was distributed all over Greece. It was highly monetized by the 5th century because of its production of one of the most important cash crops, which is wine. As a non-tributary ally of Athens, Chios minted substantial local coinage on its own standard. Now comes the top one. But in the 4th century, the Chian weight standard suddenly spread. One intrinsic advantage of the Chian coinage must have been that its weight was compatible with the Aeginetan standard, which had re-emerged, and with the Aeginetan standard, which had re-emerged in the 4th century. According to Thucydides, 4 Chian tetradrachms were equal to 5 Aeginetan didrachms. However, special political conditions triggered the particular attractiveness of the Chian standard. Shortly after the Peloponnesian War, some towns in the mainland and island along the Ionian coast produced a common coinage marked with the letters Syn, coinage of the Symmachoi. There's the sigma, epsilon, and nu. Yeah. The obverse had a common Dorian design, Heracles strangling snakes, and the letters S, sigma, epsilon, nu. But for the reverse, each city chose its own type. Here it's one of Samos. The coinage was probably the product of a brief alliance formed under the command of the Spartan admiral Lysander at the end of the Peloponnesian War. The weight of the stater was carefully chosen, for the tetradrum of this coinage was equal to 3 Chian drams and also to 2 Persian sikloi. Apparently, the coinage was intended from its incipiation to be used in both adjacent exchange networks. Yet the federal coinage also reflects a new importance of the Chian weight standard. Before the coinage, the Chian standard had been current only locally in Chios, Ephesus, and Rhodes. Immediately after the alliance coinage, it was adopted by Kos, Caria, Smyrna, Colophon, Iasos, and Idume, Ainos, and Thasos. By 375, Abydos, Miletus, Assos, Tenedos, Erythrae, and the Persian satrapies joined in. 25 years later, it had been adopted by the Achaemenid royal mints. Of the over 1,000 coins which have been found in the so-called Pixodaros hoard, deposited in Halikarnassos about 350 BCE, all were struck on the Chian standard, Apart from its influence on the spread of the Chian coin standard, the alliance coinage marks a turning point in the use of currencies beyond their place of origin. In the 5th century, particular city coinages had dominated interregional monetary networks, such as the Aeginetan and then the Athenian currencies. The alliance coinage for the first time was a locally produced coinage, allowing for some local identification with a stamp on the reverse, while transcending local meaning and function by a common type and by its deliberate compatibility with other weight standards. The alliance coinage, moreover, was among the first that was produced in combination with civic coinages in the same city. The cities that issued the federal coinage retained their home issues at the same time. During the 5th century, some towns had produced small change by using Athenian or Aeginetan coinage as interregional currencies. From now on, even large communities such as Rhodes combined a local with an interregional coinage. This was the time when Plato, the philosopher, in his later work The Laws, tried to distinguish between an epicoric, a local, and a Hellenic coinage in order to keep out gold and silver from the ideal city. I mean, the function of the separation of these coinages was in his mind something different, but the idea of having 2 coinages is the same as that was applied in practice. By the mid-4th century, Philip II adopted an Attic standard coinage for external transactions, while local Macedonian mints continued to produce coinages on various local standards for internal purposes. Such bimonetarism, which became the pattern of the Eastern Mediterranean from the 4th century onwards until well into the Roman period, reflects 2 important developments. Just wanted to give you various examples of these posthumous Alexander coinages. Firstly, local monetary networks based on small civic coinages continued to exist. Secondly, interregional exchange, whether commercial or political in nature, was increasingly dominated by a single currency or weight standard, or by a standard that had some common and shared political meaning. Examples of the former are the coinage of Athens and later the denarii of the Romans. Examples of the latter are the posthumous Alexander coinages, which were connected by a shared weight standard and some aspect of their iconography, which you can see on this assemblage of different posthumous Alexander coins. They were minted in all Hellenistic kingdoms except Egypt after the death of Alexander. When the Romans gradually conquered the Mediterranean world, a single monetary zone gradually emerged. Yet rather than the Romans imposing their currency on the provinces by force and legislation, the denarius gradually became the top currency as a result of taxation and exchange. In some areas, we hear that reckoning in Roman monetary units was enforced. Thus, an inscription from Thessaly in northern Greece refers to a directive of Augustus, according to which tolls and taxes had to be calculated in terms of denarii. Germanicus laid down a law for a customs station at Palmyra, at the very edge of the Roman Empire, provisioning that all taxes must be reckoned in Italian asses. In a reissue of that law under Hadrian, it was promulgated that larger taxes were to be collected eis denarion, in terms of denarii, whereas smaller amounts were allowed to be paid in local cash. The term eis denarion, or pros Italicon assarion, however, did not mean that only denarii and assaria were accepted. As we know from numerous documents from Egypt, the formulation rather meant that this was the unit used as the standard. If payments were made in other coins, the tax collector probably had to exchange it, and an agio was probably claimed from taxpayers. From Egypt, we know that such agios were in the range of 10% of the payment due. The laws were thus aimed at the consolidation of tax revenue for the Roman state and put some pressure on tax collectors, but they did not prohibit local coinages from circulation and use, and they also did not aim at it. Nevertheless, local minting of precious metal coinages did cease normally within the first generation of the Roman takeover. The speed with which Roman coinage was adopted varied, however. In Italy, Sicily, and North Africa, the Roman silver coinage very soon was the only precious metal coinage in circulation. In Asia Minor, Roman denarii became current 1 generation after its conquest. In Syria, only by the time of Augustus. In other areas, the denarius coexisted with local issues for some time. In Spain, Iberian denarii were minted in large numbers from the 2nd century onwards and continued to do so until the time of Augustus. In Gaul, natively produced silver coinage continued to play some role, and so did British issues in Norfolk and southern Britain. Many cities continued to mint local bronze coinages, a practice which was both prestigious and also necessary in order to supply the local economies with small change. Only in Egypt, the local silver drum, which had a very reduced silver content, circulated exclusively until the reign of Diocletian. A unified currency facilitated the collection of taxes and benefited the flow of coins between Rome and the provinces. But as circulation patterns of coinages show, exchange networks remained a combination of imperial, regional, and local ones. A large amount of tax revenue was spent locally, and there was no globalization of markets under the Roman Empire. In the Eastern Empire, which had much stronger monetary and political traditions than the West, local minting never ceased completely and became more abundant in the 3rd century when the central Roman mints became more and more unable to supply the ever-increasing demand for money at a local level. There was thus no attempt either to establish or to prevent territorial or national currencies in the ancient world, neither by the city-states, Greek city-states, nor by the Roman government. Taxes and tributes, military payments, and markets in practice created consolidated monetary zones. Monetary networks were the outcome of exchange practices, taxation, and of agreements between governments that realized the advantages of a common monetary zone. As national ideologies were absent, there were also no national currencies to be enforced or guarded against other currencies. As in other periods of history, the circulation of currencies and the formation of monetary networks represent dominant forms of social organization and the politics on which such organization is based. Thank you very much.